Bengali went hand in hand with the marginalization of the Muslim, the Bengali Muslim. Bengali grammar was colonized by the West Bengali. Countless verb forms, and again there's a lot of detail, I'm just giving you a few examples. Countless verb forms such as bosha, pora, thora, to sit, to do, to hold, that in East Bengali prose and poetry would have been boshaye, poraye, thoraye, became boshia, poria, dhuria. Second person verb forms ending with a more respectful sounding ba were replaced by the more colloquial sounding be. So instead of tumi khaiba, you will eat or tumi jaiba. You will go, tumi khaibe or tumi jaibe were recognized as standard usage, and keeps multiplying examples. So for example, expressions denoting from or near, thone, hote were replaced by kriki, kache, nikoti. The last letter of the Bengali alphabet, Chandrabindu, that has a nasal sound, seemed to not be in use in East Bengal. Thus, the word for moon was chand, not chand, pand for a trap, not pand, and so on. Numbering styles were also transformed. Ordinal numbers in East Bengal were typically Poila, Dusra, Besra, with a slight modification from words used in Hindi and Urdu. And was added to the numbers after 80. Ekisha, Trisha, Cholisha. Following the Sanskritic usage of West Bengal, the prevalent Bengali usage was now Prothom, Dvitiyo for the ordinals, and Tomo added to the higher numbers, so Umatrishtamo, Panchalingshatamo, etc. Although the construction was unwieldy, they were accepted because the easy alternative expression was Baman. And in fact, if you take a look at his books, you'll see that he deliberately names the chapters as Trisha Odhaya. He basically, whatever he argues, he puts into effect in his own writing. Interestingly, Ahmed's argument was not only that the Bengali was not only against the Bengali that was imported from the West, that is from West Bengal. The struggle for the mother tongue in East Pakistan was in equal measure against Urdu. To the champions of Urdu, detractors who argued that before the development of textbooks in Bengali in East Bengal, there should be a slate of technical terms, Paribhasha, that must be first developed. Ahmed countered that often words that become part of ordinary usage, before we develop technical terms for them. In fact, sometimes we don't. For example, words like syringe, doctor, nurse, cabin, bed, hospital, stethoscope were widely used in Bengali by ordinary people when they were patients and doctors. Similarly, lectures, notes, blackboards were all part of the ordinary parlance of school and college instruction. Why would these not be part of the Bengali vocabulary? Whether a word was derived from English or Portuguese or Sanskrit or Arabic or Persian was the business, he argued, of linguists. For the Jonashadro, the ordinary people, students, teachers, this was irrelevant. Ahmed's understanding of East Pakistan's minority status, despite being a demographic majority, was thus along two registers, political and linguistic and literary. In this, there was a continuity between his pre-partition and post-partition stance. As far as he was concerned, 47 was necessary. It was historically necessary and justified. But after 47, he writes, there was a fundamental, a maulic transformation in his literary approach. If you go to Amar Dakha Rajniti Ponchash Bochur, you won't find a reprisal of the account of that shift. For that, we must turn to the autobiography or to the Antobata. The difference between the two memoirs is important because they represent the distinction that Ahmed maintained between Rashtriya or political as it pertains to the affairs of the nation state or Rashtra. So the difference between the political or Rashtriya Shadunata and Krishti Shokiyata, cultural autonomy. He writes that after partition, the category East Bengal substituted the space hitherto occupied by the Musalman in his thought. Quote, East Bengal was a part of Pakistan in the statist sense. In the cultural sense, East Bengal was always a sovereign, self-contained province. That cultural autonomy was on the one hand completely independent of the other province, West Pakistan. On the other hand, it was also completely independent of the other part of historic Bengal, that is, West Bengal. This is in the Atharvaveda. The most contemporary East Bengali Muslim poets, literateurs, and intellectual leaders seemed completely unaware of their cultural difference, writes Ahmed, a fact that not only saddened him but left him astonished. One group among these intellectuals argued that there was no separation between East and West Pakistan, as both were Islamic. To them, a separation on the grounds of Christi or culture was untenable. An opposed faction argued with equal fervor that both East and West Bengal were united by a common Bengali Christi. For the Islamic group, Muhammad Iqbal was the national poet, while the votaries of a shared Bengali Christi championed Rabindranath Tagore. Both groups seemed united by a consensus that East Bengalis or East Pakistanis had no cultural autonomy. There was no room in the discourse for a sovereign language, culture, and literature, as if such autonomy was superfluous. Needless to say, Ahmed did not identify with either camp. He recalls that for the 30 years or so before partition, when he circulated in Calcutta literary circles, he was regarded as a person who was linguistically Muslim. Upon his return to the literary circles in Dhaka post-partition, he was treated as Bamal. He remembered Qazi Nazrul Islam, from whom he received patronage and support when he stayed in Calcutta. But even that support, Ahmed recalls, was tempered by a basic difference between the two men. The difference lay in the way that Nazrul and Ahmed used Perso-Arabic Musalmani words in their writings. Ahmed used them not because they were Arabic or Persian, but because they occurred in the everyday prose of Bengali Muslims. Spoken every day, these words were spelled and pronounced differently by Bengalis than their original Arabic or Farsi spellings, or their original Arabic or Farsi pronunciation. Nor did he scour dictionaries for such words. Nazrul, he noted, used a series of mitha, sweet and difficult words from the Perso-Arabic lexicon in his poems. In Nazrul's writings, such words only appear in his Musalmani poems and not in other poetry or prose works. But, Ahmed argued, that they should be part of the Bengali vocabulary because everyday ordinary usage had rendered them Bengali should be common sense. Bengali Hindus rarely use these words. The question of a different Bengali language was thus a matter of cultural originality or shokyota of the minority community in undivided India, so Muslims in undivided India. In undivided Bengal, it was a matter of cultural repression by an advanced minority of a backward majority. As he put it, in East Bengal or East Pakistan, presently independent sovereign Bangladesh, this is Ahmed writing, I'm quoting, this grew into a question about the cultural and political autonomy and personality and freedom of a liberated nation state, also Nandavana. In an essay published on February 21st, 1964, Ahmed noted that to argue that activists martyred themselves on that day to have their mother tongue Bengali recognized over a foreign tongue, Urdu, was to only recognize that which was the most visible and perceptible. Their sacrifice was actually a struggle for autonomy and originality. To be a member of a sovereign nation state was no guarantee to human freedom. In the spirit of the Italian Risorgimento, in which one of the rallying cries was, having made Italy, we must make Italians, we must now make Italians, the student martyrs in Dhaka appeared to be saying, 5 years ago, we created Pakistan. Today, we are creating Pakistanis. Ahmed coined phrases such as Tower Bengali and Khamar Bengali, so Tower Bengali and Farm Bengali, sophisticated versus crude Bengali, the Bengali of the master and the servant, to draw attention to the discrimination that he alleges. Quote, East Bengalis had no culture, only agriculture, was the patronizing description of farm Bengali by the speakers of Tower Bengali. Cultural, literary, and linguistic colonialism were principally mental phenomena. Unlike status discrimination and economic class divisions, that were readily manifest as symptoms of colonialism, literary and cultural and linguistic domination was mental and much more difficult to cognize. From the 40s, when he was still in Calcutta, Ahmed recalls writing regularly in the Daily Ittihad to gather support for the language movement. But the language movement failed to do justice to the cultural originality of the new nation. Ahmed notes, quote, the themes of national sovereignty, cultural originality, and popular freedom that a handful of authors were able to express as part of the East Pakistan Renaissance movement in Calcutta was not articulable in Dhaka in the 1950s, unquote. When he addressed the Progressive Writers Association in 1943, Ahmed spoke with greater certainty about a literary Pakistan in Bengal than about a political Pakistan within India. Post-partition, in the sovereign nation-state of Pakistan, the conviction about cultural and linguistic originality was corroded. So badly scorched was the consciousness of educated Muslims, and I mean educated Muslims meaning educated Bengali Muslims, by the fire of Tower Bengali, a language created in British Calcutta over 2¼ centuries, that they continued to identify as a Muslim Bajruk. To restore sovereignty that was both in the realm of Rashtra and Krishti, nation state and culture, it was necessary for these Bengalis to break the shackles of Tower Bengali and bring in the Khamar Bengali of everyday speech into literature. The clear appreciation of Krishti Shokiyata or cultural originality came to him, writes Ahmed, from reading the history of cultural upliftment in Germany, Italy, Ireland, and especially the United States. So this is the America or Abu Mansur Ahmed's America. In a wide-ranging chapter entitled Status versus Cultural Uniqueness, Rashtric Bonam Krishtik Shokyota, Ahmed compares the question of Bengali in East Bengal with the status of English in the United States. He drew an analogy between his own crusade to persuade East Pakistani Bengali Muslims to shed the burden of the dominant Bengali of West Bengal to those of a number of American intellectuals, thinkers, and authors from the late 18th to the 20th century. And it's a very wide and strange range of authors that he invokes. So he invokes Noah Webster, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Thomas Jefferson, Mark Twain, Walt Whitman, Henry Cabot Lodge, William Faulkner, James Fenimore Cooper, H.L. Mencken, T.S. Eliot, Gertrude Stein, and Ezra Pound. I'm going to stay with Mencken because he's the most idiosyncratic. The chapter opens with the American lexicographer who you all know, Noah Webster, from the dictionary. But Ahmed actually cites his Webster's 409-page treatise called Dissertations on the English Language. And it was published, interestingly, in 1789. It would be useful to recall some of Webster's arguments in the book as they chime with Ahmed's concerns. Written many years before the dictionary, the book outlined Webster's polemics. It's a slightly long quote, so stay with me. Here's Webster. As an independent nation, he's writing about America, as an independent nation, our honor requires us to have a system of our own in language as well as government. Great Britain, whose children we are and whose language we speak, should no longer be our standard, for the taste of her writers is already corrupted and her language on the decline. However, they, the Americans, may boast of independence and the freedom of their government, yet their opinions are not sufficiently independent. An astonishing respect for the arts and literature of their parent country and a blind imitation of its manners are still prevalent among the Americans. Now is the time, and this is the country. Let us then seize the present moment and establish a national language as well as a national government. Delay in the plan here proposed may be fatal, unquote. Now, even in his own times, Webster's ideas were not hegemonic. Ahmed acknowledges the opposition he faced, but finds in this pugnacious man, who is described by one contemporary, one John Pickering, also an author of a book on American vocabulary, as, and I'm quoting Pickering on Webster, as a pusillanimous, half-begotten, self-dubbed patriot, unquote, a parallel from his own battles with fellow Bengali Muslims on the language issue. The East Pakistani counterpart of Noah Webster's controversial dictionary, notes Ahmed, was the philologist and linguist Dr. Muhammad Shahibullah's Dictionary of the Regional Languages of East Pakistan, published in 1965. That Ahmed did not care about how Webster would have been perceived by his contemporaries is evident when he cites Thomas Jefferson, who had very little patience for Webster's federalist politics and the federal English that Webster championed, and in fact described Webster as a political busybody. Nevertheless, Jefferson himself was invested in considerations about English in the new American nation. In fact, I found it very interesting that Jefferson coined the word neologism. And it goes to demonstrate his sympathy with new coinages. In fact, Jefferson writes, through judicious neology, Jefferson argued, the language of America would be improved, even if it implied parting ways with the English of England. In 1813, he wrote, quote, certainly so great growing a population, spread over such an extent of country, with such a variety of climates of production of arts, must enlarge their language to make it answer its purpose of expressing all ideas, the new as well as the old. The new circumstances under which we are placed called for new words, new phrases, and for the transfer of old words to new objects. An American dialect will therefore be formed. Jefferson was opposed to contemporaneous efforts to establish an American Academy of Languages and Belles Lettres that endeavored to develop a single standard American language and preserve it from corruption and debasement. He favored the dialectal diversity of the English language and regarded dictionaries as retrospective repositories of words developed through popular usage. Sentences that no doubt would have resonated with Ahmed, Jefferson wrote, quote, society is the workshop in which new words are elaborated. When an individual uses a new word, if ill-formed, it is rejected by society. If well-formed, adopted, and after due time, laid up in the depositories of dictionaries. Another American repeatedly invoked in the Abdurrahman, both in the chapter that I'm mentioning and elsewhere, is Emerson. Ahmed mentions Emerson's journals from 1842, where the latter, Emerson, criticized Charles Dickens. Reading Emerson, it is not difficult to see why Ahmed would have found him resonant. Here's a little bit of Emerson on Dickens. So Emerson writes, quote, I read Dickens's American Notes. It answers its ends very well, which plainly was to make a readable.
আন্দোলনটা করেছিলেন তার রাজনীতি, তার লেখনী, তার সাংবাদিকতা সব কিছু দিয়ে নাম আমরা সবসময় তো এই বিষয়ের মধ্যে আপনার ধারণা কি? আর এলিট কনফ্লিক্ট হয়েছে, তো আপনি এমন সময় এই বক্তৃতা রাখলেন এখানে, তো সেটা হচ্ছে যে এখন মানে ভাগ হয়ে যাওয়ার পর সবাই ওপার বাংলায় চলে গেছিল, যারা একটু এলিট ছিলেন, আবুল মনসুর আহমদ সাহেব চলে গেছিলেন, তিনি ওখানেই ছিল, আর অনেকেই চলে গেছিলেন যেমন, তো ফলে যেটা হচ্ছে সুন্দর হচ্ছে। এখন কিন্তু আবার বাঙালি মুসলমানদের মধ্যে পশ্চিমবাংলায় একটা জাগরণ এসছে, তাদের ছেলেমেয়েরা খুব ভালো লেখাপড়া করছে, ডাক্তার হচ্ছে, ইন্ডিয়ানের চাঁদানো হচ্ছে, WBCS হচ্ছে, এগুলো হচ্ছে। তো সেই এই কনফ্লিক্টকে আবার হতে পারে, এই ধরনের একটা অনেকের আশঙ্কা প্রকাশ করছে। তো আমি আপনার বক্তব্য খুব মনোযোগ দিয়ে শুনেছি এবং অনেক বিষয় আপনি বলেছেন। আর দ্বিতীয়ত আমি অভিনন্দন জানাবো আপনাকে, যিনি প্রেসিডেন্সি ইউনিভার্সিটিতে এই অনুষ্ঠানের আয়োজন করেছেন ম্যাডামকে নিয়ে। তার কারণ আমি দীর্ঘদিন ধরে ছোটোবেলা থেকে আমি খবর কাগজ পড়ি, সাহিত্য চর্চা করি, বিশেষ করে সাংবাদিকতা সাহিত্য না। তাই আমি কখনো দেখিনি যে আমার বছর আমাকে নিয়ে আমাদের কোনো বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ে কোনো আলোচনা হচ্ছে। আমার মনে হয় এটা প্রথম গুরু আমার, তার জন্য আপনাদেরকে ধন্যবাদ। আর শেরেবাংলা ফজলুল্লাহ নিয়েও মাস 6 আগে মাস 8 আগে জওয়াহর সরকারের একটা আলোচনা আমাদের প্রেসিডেন্সি ইউনিভার্সিটি করছিল, সেটাও একটা নতুন জিনিস, সেদের নিয়ে আলোচনা খুব কম। তার জন্য আপনাকে অনেক ধন্যবাদ।
একটা প্রশ্ন, তারপরে Sociology, Presidency University. We welcome you all. It's a very special event for us for reasons I mentioned soon. But for being here, despite the inclement weather and extensive waterlogging in the city.
It is actually translated into 17 languages. This is the first international book on our war, our
ইউনিভার্সিটি ওয়েবসাইট কথাই শুনতে চাই। আপনি যে শেষে আপনি যে নামটা